this out in regular pencil. After the regular pencil, what I'm doing is I'm doing black and white on this tan paper. Again, just as good practice, I don't want to mix the black and white together. So where you can see on mine, my white over here and the brighter part of that particular grape, it's brighter down on this end. I've got a little bit of darkness in the middle over here. Is it enough? Is it dark enough? No. You could always make it darker. The only reason why I actually put down any black to begin with at all is just so you have a little feel of what the finished thing's supposed to look like before we start layering on color. So remember, when you're adding black, less is more, and we can always go back and add more later on. Now, when I do this particular one, I'm going to use probably 5 colors here, which is a little bit more than what I did for the other ones. What I want to do is I'm going to start with yellow. No matter what we're doing in terms of fruit, okay, we are always going to do the lightest color first. Now, these are going to be red, sort of burgundy grapes, but with that, when the grapes are sort of like young and sort of just first like budding, they do have a bit of yellow in them, and they slowly turn to red. Now, with that said, I'm not going to cover this thing in yellow like I did on the previous fruit. I'm just kind of going over a little bit around that hot spot over here, a little bit with the yellow. Down over here where it's going to be brighter, I'm going to add a little bit of yellow, but I'm not going over the entire fruit with yellow. So that's the one departure from what we did the first time. We're not covering everything in yellow. The first color that we're going to use pretty much everywhere is called poppy red. Okay? If you have trouble distinguishing it from the other colors, poppy red is the bright red that's going to look a little closer to orange than it does actual, like, you know, crimson. We use crimson to shade our dark spots on the green fruit before. With the poppy red, I don't want this thing to be like an apple red grape. We're going to ultimately try to make this thing look sort of violet and purplish. But what I do want to do is I want to kind of layer one little layer of poppy red over almost all of it. Now, again, the first layer of coloring is like the lightest layer of coloring. To me, in a lot of ways, it's also the most important, because if you put down a good first layer, you're basically just following that color the whole way through. If you press down super duper hard and you add too much color to start with, it becomes a little problematic later on fixing it. So what I'm doing is a light layer of poppy red. I'm covering up just a little bit of the yellow. I'm kind of fading into that yellow, and I'm leaving the white bright spots, and I am putting a little poppy red over the dark areas as well. The next color that I'm switching over to is called magenta. All right, the magenta and the poppy red are both like equal in terms of like how bright they are, but since the magenta sort of leans a little bit more towards purple, that's why I'm using that second. The magenta and the poppy red, we're trying to kind of think about using them almost like together. So everywhere I put poppy red, I'm also putting a thin layer of magenta. Okay, so anywhere I put even a light version of it, that's going over. And again, I'm going over the dark area with magenta as well. I don't want to press down super duper hard just yet because I haven't gotten all my layers of color in. And if I press down really hard to begin with on this, it's going to make a really sort of pinkish looking grape. That's not what I'm looking for. After magenta, the next color we're going to use is called the crimson red. Crimson red is that darker red. Crimson red is the one that we used on the green apple to kind of make the shadows darker. The crimson red is not going over the entire thing. Crimson red is just going over the darkest parts of my particular grape. So that area that has a little bit of shadow on it, this outer rim that I put a little bit of black on it, and sort of this middle-ish part, that's where the crimson red's going. There's going to be a little bit of crimson red as we get closer to that other grape, but I'm not covering the whole thing in crimson red. After crimson red, the last real color that we're using is called black grape. Not black, black grape. It is a dark violet color, and this is the color that we're going to use to kind of just make that dark spot on the fruit. We're not just using it for the shadows, but we want to kind of fade in a little bit to the other layers of color that I just put down. Now, if we have done a nice, light, even layer of color to start with, again, this is ideal in terms of now I'm just following this thing over and over again. I'm just going to repeat the process, and we've done this before. So when I repeat the process, I'm going to come down this time and press down a little bit harder. I'm going to add a little bit of the white into the fading into those other areas. When I start using that little bit of white to fade in some of the, I guess, bright spots, you're going to notice that the white is starting to work like a blending stump. What it should do is it sort of presses in a little bit of that white color with the yellow and with the alternating poppy and things like that, and it should make almost like a little bit of a pinkish hue in the brighter areas of my fruit. Again, I'm only really repeating what I did in the beginning, maybe pressing down a little bit harder. Again, I'm just going to put a hint of yellow in near the stem especially, because that's where the fruit tends to ripen from. And I'll put a little bit in the bright section. Again, the yellow is not something we're putting all over the place. We're using it sparingly. A little bit of my poppy red. Okay. That kind of fades in and around those bright spots. It fades into the yellow. We press a little bit harder in the darker areas to kind of fill those in. Wherever I put poppy red, the next color that I'm adding is magenta. Okay, we want to go ahead and almost kind of combine the two of those together. So the magenta and the poppy are really kind of used almost equally. They're used interchangeably, and they're used together to kind of get that sort of pinkish reddish, hue. After that, I'm going to my crimson red, which is my first dark color. It only works through the darker areas. Okay. And then finally, I'm going to go to black grape. And black grape is what creates that really dark shadowed area, that sort of burgundy, deep Merlot kind of purple. All right. And what can I do after 2 layers of color? I can do a 3rd layer of color if I like. What I would tell you on the neutral tone paper is that, these are small enough that I think my hope was that you would get multiple practices at it. And if you screwed up one grape and failed, well, then we just turn and start doing another grape. But what we want to do is we want to build up those layers of color. I generally think, until you really know what you're doing, working with light layers and then just kind of working your way up to 2 to 3 layers before we do any sort of blending. You can use a blending stump on this. You don't have to use a blending stump on this. I think just with the pressure from how hard you're working the pencils, you could probably get a nice finished looking grape. But what I want to do with this one is get warm colors, and obviously we're using 5 colors. We're using a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow, poppy red, magenta, crimson red, and black grape. I'm going to write those out and put them up on the board for you as well, so you know what we're working with as we're going with them. And after I'm done with my crimson and my black grape, I might go over this particular one with a little bit of a blending stump. But again, never use the blending stump until the whole thing is near its sort of finished sort of stage. When you blend from the lighter areas out. So blend those in first before you get your blending stump all dirty with different colors. And this blending stump part, once you're done burnishing it, that means pressing all that stuff into the paper. It's not necessarily going to be very easy to add more color to it. So keep that in mind when you're working, that this is really just the finishing touch. I'm going to just touch up over here and try to brighten up my little brightest spots a little bit. For the stem, and with the stem, I don't have to go too crazy, but I did add black and white to the stem. We're going to keep the stem relatively simple. You're going to kind of use mostly lime peel. All right, so we're going to use mostly lime peel. You can see I already did the stem in black and white, so I can kind of pick up some of those highlights. It's going to be hard to kind of really be like super careful with the lime peel, so all I'm doing is kind of going over everything, maybe not covering up the white completely. And then we're going to switch back to dark green. So you're going to do the stem in just 2 colors. The dark green I'm just using on the areas that need to be dark. The areas that I started off with a little bit of black that need a little bit of shadow, and then I could just alternate with the lime peel and the dark green on those. You don't have to go really, really crazy with this. You can always come back over the top with it a little bit of white. It's a lot less work. It's a lot less work than it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and walk this example around, and then I'm going to really just do a quick version of this on the black paper. Okay, so number 1, finished grape. All right. I'll put it up on the board so you see all the colors that I used. All right. If you're doing a black paper, I'm about to do a black paper demo right now. All right. And then this will be up, and you can look at the colors and everything else like that. But it should look like a nice little grouping of black and white fruit. My recommendation is do 1 grape at a time. Do 1 grape at a time. That way, if you screw up 1 grape, you can always try another one. Yes, you can always try another one. All right, so if the first one doesn't work out, we got another one over there. I'm not looking at this as a perfect cluster for your practice, that you have like 6 wonderfully looking grapes. I would settle for one good looking one if you had to kind of redo to it, you know what I mean? So if you screw up one, go to the next one. So you can do them really one at a time. That was one of the reasons why I picked grapes to begin with. If you are doing this on black paper, I'll do that right now. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to redraw another grape over here. So I've got my little grape. I know you're not going to be able to see the pencil lines right now on the paper with the projection, but I'm going to go ahead and work on that one anyway. I'm doing the same basic shape of the grape. So with the black paper, we are only working with white, obviously. We're going to make sure that we do a nice bright white on the areas where I see a lot of bright color. So not just that hot spot, but this whole like sort of like lower portion, lower and left side portion of this grape, I'm going to make sure that I do nice and bright. Now I want to make sure as I'm working towards the center, you could see how like I'm fading away. I don't want really hard edges on any of this shading over there. I don't want it to look just like a black stripe down the middle. I've got the bright hot spot that's up here near the stem. Okay. And again, I'm going to do a little bit with my pencil to kind of fade out. And remember, like if you make your little fruits a little bit too bright over here, your grapes, it's not the end of the world, because we can, again, always make something a little bit darker. When I'm working with the first color, which is going to be yellow, I don't want to cover up all that white. I also don't want to color yellow over top of anything that doesn't already have white on it. So I'm not putting yellow over top the dark areas. I'm not even covering all the white with yellow. I'm just kind of tinting a little bit of color. If you're watching what I'm doing, I really didn't even cover that much. You might not be able to really notice the difference over here. I am going to post this video for you guys. Once I'm done with that yellow, I'm going to switch to my poppy red. Okay, with my poppy red, I just want to kind of come in a little bit. I want to fade into the yellow. I want to add a little tiny bit of poppy over top of that yellow. All right, almost like the yellow is just very lightly changing over to red. But as that white fades out, so does my poppy red. Okay? I'm not covering the entire fruit with poppy red. I'm just kind of covering up areas that had white previously on it, and I'm fading into my yellow. Okay? And, you know, again, if I mess up my fade out a little bit, I'll work on it as I'm going. Okay? From the poppy red, I'm going to magenta. Okay? And with magenta is a color I'm going to kind of almost do the exact same thing that I did with the poppy red, except with magenta, I'm going to very lightly bring some of that magenta through the dark areas. So that's the first color that really starts covering up some of my shaded area. All right. We don't want to add a lot of it, but we do want to kind of get a little bit of that magenta in there. From there, I'm going to go to crimson red. Crimson red is another color that, again, only really appears in the darker spots of the fruit. I'm not pressing down super hard. I still want some of that black paper sticking through, but I'm really only adding it in there. And this is when I switch over to my black grape. Black grape is my shadow. It's going to be that darker part of the fruit. Okay? If at this point this shaded area looks too bright, well, that's something that we'll have to adjust later on, and I'll show you how we'll do it. We can always even use in a lot of ways. If we can't make it darker enough with black grape, we can use dark green. Just like the other process, I want to repeat the process. I want to add white again. Again, the second time around, I'm pressing down a little bit harder. I'm adding just a little bit more value to this. And really what the white should be doing at this point, the white should almost work like a blending stump. So you might see that as you're using the white on the brighter areas, it's kind of mushing those other colors together, smearing together, and making a nice, smooth, even surface of color. I'm going to go ahead and just add a little bit more. Then I'm going to add just a little trace of yellow. Again, it's almost like the fruit's just ripening. So if you get too much like pink in the light areas, adding a little bit of yellow will kind of help orange that up a little bit and make it a little bit more natural of color. Then I'll go to my poppy red. Poppy red only really goes over fading into that yellow, and just to those areas that had white on them. Okay, we don't want to go, poppy is a pretty bright color. We don't want to cover the whole fruit in it because it'll kind of wreck our shadows. But anywhere that was sort of bright, we'll add it. Magenta goes over that, except magenta also goes over the shaded areas. Okay. And after magenta, we're switching to crimson. A little bit of crimson. The crimson's important over here because if we do have to make this darker later on, we're going to add dark green. So that dark green and that crimson get together and they kind of make that darker value. But that's only if that last color, the black grape, doesn't work. I've placed all these colors up front for you. Again, my suggestion is that you do one grape at a time. You see how it works. You see that you're getting it good. If you struggle with the first grape, all right, move on to another grape and we'll try the same process again, except maybe try to correct whatever happened the first time. On black paper, just as a reminder, we never use a blending stump on black paper. It kind of makes everything look very dull once you burnish it into the paper. So if you ever need to blend, just do it by how hard you're pressing. And here's my additional grape. I know it's kind of hard to see on the projector, so I'm going to go ahead and walk that around for you guys right now to take a look. Up front right now, you can see my examples. I've also written out the colors in order. Yellow, poppy red, magenta, crimson, and black grape. They're all there for you.